and community
Recording in
resource
progress.
in Indianapolis from its start in 1914 in downtown to 23rd and Meridian, and then to this location. As a people who know what it's like to be excluded, it's important to us that we truly embrace people of all backgrounds and faiths. For more than a century, the JCC has maintained a generational inclusive environment where all people can learn, play, and connect. If you didn't know, most of the members of the JCC are not Jewish. And we like it that way. Then as you came down the hallway, you passed the Jewish Federation of Greater Indianapolis's office. They are really the umbrella philanthropic arm of the Jewish community. We are all constituent agents of Federation. If you keep walking that way, there is a Federation daycare. Again, probably at least 80% non-Jewish. Then when you get to the very end, where I usually hang out, is the Jewish Community Relations Council. And the JCRC is about public affairs, community engagement. Really, we have a great name, community relations. That's what it's all about. And we also attend to government affairs. Directly across the street, I'm not finished, is JFS, Jewish Family Services, which is our social services department, including mental health, food pantry. Then one building over is Hooverwood, which is a skilled nursing facility. Again, less than half Jewish. So while we call this the Jewish Community Center, it really is the Indianapolis Community Center. Oops. That's me. Whoops. So since I get to speak, I'm going to talk about GMA, which is a fairly new organization, Greater Indianapolis Multi-Faith Alliance. We are an organizer, first and foremost, organizing the congregations of Indianapolis, Greater Indianapolis, to advocate for affordable housing and to end this evictions mess. You know, we hear lots of data in these presentations, and I'd like to give you a couple personal stories. So I was at an event about 2 weeks ago, and a sick man, S-I-K-H, not S-I-C-K, came up and told me that he had put an offer on a house at full asking. Was a modest house, $150,000. They knew they had to offer full asking because of the market, and they thought they were going to get it. Until a company from New Jersey bid $50,000 over asking. And what are the sellers going to do? No, I'm not going to take $50,000 extra dollars. So it's a horrible thing, but let's think about the consequences there. First off, it's falsely raising housing prices in that neighborhood, increasing the tax base. But this man and his family has 2 young children. Now, aren't looking for $150,000 houses. They're looking for $200,000 houses. And it's out of his price range. So they are left thinking, probably rightly so, that they're not going to be able to buy a house. The second story I'd like to convey, I just got a text from a friend. This is 3 days ago. Hi, Aaron, this is name taken out. I think I told you I'm working with a co-sponsor group for an Afghan family. They're having problems with water and sewage in the basement. I'll spare you the full story until I know if you might have advice. But the short story is the landlord isn't too responsive. What a surprise. What are their rights and what can they do? And my response to her was, that's horrible. And I'm sorry, but there isn't anything really they can do. I said, here's some links to some resources. Contact the health department, to which she texted back, it seems like open sewage in the basement doesn't qualify as inhabitable. We've reported it to the health department, but so far, no response. Now, these are both immigrant stories, mostly because they're the most recent for me, but I hear these stories all the time. Yes, it's anecdotal, but they're true. We all here know Indianapolis is number 2 in total evictions in the country. And yet Every day I meet someone, and this is not hyperbolic, every day I meet someone smart, educated, informed, who has no clue about evictions and affordable housing in their own city. They just don't know it. Not to mention that our status as number 2 is based on court filings. I'm just now learning how many soft evictions, probably as many, if not more, happen. People that never go to court because they don't know they have rights. The landlord says, get out, and they leave. We don't track this. Nobody tracks it. Particularly because they're not on the homeless rolls yet. The stories I'm hearing is they couch surf. They go to another family's home until another family needs to use that facility. Then they move to another family and another. And we don't know how long before they're homeless. Not to mention the fact that once they get their finances in order, they now have an eviction on their record. Indianapolis has a 96% occupancy rate. Landlords will not rent to them. It's unconscionable. I want to recognize Andrew Bradley, Hale Crumley from Prosperity, Indiana, for the work they're doing in this space, and my new best friend, Senator Qaddoura. He might not think so, who's literally single-handedly, again, not hyperbolic, taking on the housing crisis. He can't do it himself. We must organize. We must. We have an incredible amount of power. Sermon over. In my tradition, we have a prayer for all firsts. So this is a first, you all coming to the Jewish Community Center for this. It's called the Shehechianu. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Machalam, Shehechianu v'kimanu v'higianu lazman hazeh. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sustained us and brought us to this wonderful day. And I know it will be wonderful because you are wonderful people. Thank you.
I know that Fady is not Aaron's new best friend because Fady's my best friend. So just want to make sure we keep that clear. I'm going to get this Zoom thing off of here. I am very honored to be able to introduce to you Senator Fady Qaddoura. I told Andrew that I was going to dispense with the formal, they did this, they did this, they did this, because I know Fady, we've known each other for several years, and I'm going to tell you this, he cares deeply about affordable housing in the state of Indiana. We were involved heavily in Lakeside Point in the Nora area, and from day one, when he took office, he has been involved with both feet, and it has just gone from there. And he continues, as Aaron says, to champion cause after cause, trying to make some difference in the state. And with him is Andrew Bradley, who is the policy director of Prosperity, Indiana, and kind of coordinates the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. I'm going to turn it over to the two of them because Fady is talking about legislative goals that he has. Aaron is going to be following up with some policy priorities that the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition has. I think it's going to be very informative, and so it's better for me to get out of the way so you can hear from them. So Fady, without further ado, I'm going to let you other way. There we are. I'm going to let you have it. Good to see you.
Good afternoon, friends. My name is Fady, and I'm honored to be with you today. I have many friends in this room, and I sincerely mean it. I'll be brief. I'll talk specifically about one, my motive in helping with the housing crisis in Indiana, and second, specifically talk about the policy environment and the solutions that we're pursuing. And I would love to follow after that with policy discussions that maybe we can collectively, as one community, come with ideas and thoughts of how we can move forward. So in 2005, I became homeless after Hurricane Katrina. I came to the United States as an immigrant, but my wife was born and raised in the United States, and my kids were born and raised in the United States. And after Hurricane Katrina, we lost our home. So when I speak about issues of homelessness and housing, I walked in the shoes of a homeless person. And I can speak from my heart on these issues to tell you, what does it mean to struggle? Housing is critical, not only because we want to ensure that people have housing just for the sake of owning a home or renting an affordable place, but the housing policy impacts the civic fabrics of our communities. It impacts our economy. It impacts the way that we support our local schools and our local social organizations. So the impact of housing policy or the intersection of housing policy with all kinds of housing or public policy issues is critical for us to explore and understand. I will share with you from a policy perspective, why Indiana struggles with the affordable housing crisis and evictions and negligent landlords from out of the state and sometimes, unfortunately, from within the state. But I want to run through a few ideas of what led us to this point. Why are we at this point here? I'll share with you a few things. So most recently with COVID, with the supply chain issues and people working from home, the demand on homes increased and demand on affordable units increased. Since 2008, 2009, Indiana did not keep up with the pace of building homes and affordable units, whether rental or home-owned units across the state. So we are almost 14 years behind. Some reports recently conveyed that we need over 450,000 affordable rental units in the state, plus tens of thousands of different types of homes. And when we speak about homes and rental units, please remember that our community is diverse and we have diverse needs. When you speak about, for example, nursing homes or homes for senior citizens, these are different types of facilities that still Indiana struggles with making those available to our communities. So there are different types of housing units and affordable units for members of our communities who have different levels of income, and they might be struggling because of the economy and inflation and other things. The renter's deduction did not change for over 15 to 20 years in the state of Indiana. Many legislators are landlords, so that explains why the law tilts more towards landlords. And I'll speak about my legislation that I introduced last session, but a commentary that was included in the Indy Star after I included my legislation. One of my colleagues in the Senate, he's a Republican, and he's a landlord, and his caucus decided to allow him to comment on my legislation publicly. So his only reason for his caucus opposing my legislation was they didn't understand what problem I was trying to solve by protecting tenants from negligent landlords. I think it was too complicated of a problem to be understood. But I think, I'll share with you, Bruce and I and many coalitions across the city and across the county and from across the state worked on the Lakeside Point apartment complex issue. And for those of you who drove by or visited the property, you would understand that I have pictures from inside the apartment complex by which mold grew through the carpets. There were holes in the ceilings. Running water, they shut water at different stages and different times. Sometimes they would have hot water running in the summertime and cold water running in the wintertime. HVAC might not be working, all kinds of issues. And we have so many families that were impacted by this. That landlord, JPC Foundation from New Jersey, registered as a nonprofit organization in the state of Indiana. They claimed that they offered a couple of classes, financial literacy and English as a second language, and they abused their tenants. They collected millions of dollars from their tenants, but never paid the utilities. So Citizens was owed $1.2 million and was threatening to cut water on tens of families that lived there. So I was trying to solve that problem to say, I will support responsible landlords and I will support responsible tenants. In this case, it seems that the landlord was negligent and irresponsible, and the law does not support. There's no teeth in the law to protect these tenants. So I introduced Senate Bill 230, and basically it was modeled after legislation from Ohio and other places, by which we suggested that if in the case of a negligent landlord or corporate landlord, especially in the cases of out-of-state landlords, the tenants should be able to withhold a portion of their rent to fix emergency service systems such as HVAC or their heat and so on, or the plumbing and so on. And that was too radical of an idea for the legislators to think that you need running water and you need HVAC and you need to live in a place by which there should be no mold growing through the carpets. That was a radical idea. And I'm being sarcastic. I mean, it shouldn't be radical to dignify humans, especially responsible humans who are paying their rent and expecting services in return. And I approached it from not talking about Democrats versus Republicans, but I approached it from the sense of that's a breach of contract. What is the role of the General Assembly in protecting consumers under the law in cases where their rights were violated? Now, remember, it's the same General Assembly that struck down Indianapolis's ordinance that promoted the Tenants' Bill of Rights. There were cases that were reported. I think there was a case in the Indy Star a few years ago about a female that was abused by her landlord, who demanded sexual favors in return of forgiving her rent payments. We've seen out-of-state negligent landlords. We have seen that there are just some consumers who might not be fully informed about their rights under a contract with the landlord. So what is wrong with educating the consumers about their rights under the contract or under the law? So I introduced Senate Bill 230 to deal with that specific issue. And before I introduced the law, working with Bruce and Patchwork India and other organizations, I went to people. I work in a nonpartisan way because these issues shouldn't be partisan. I will work with Republicans, with Democrats, with anyone who's willing to help solve that problem. So believe it or not, I went to our Attorney General, Todd Rokita, and I worked with him. I fiercely oppose him on so many policies, but he is the Attorney General of the state of Indiana. And I said, what can you do about this case? He filed a lawsuit, which I was grateful for. His office did. But the judge deemed that the AG does not have jurisdiction over the case because nonprofits in the state of Indiana fall under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of State, not the AG. So they sent the case to mediation, and they've included the creditors and the lenders, including the utilities, to come up with some kind of solution. Our goal from day one to remove the negligent landlord and to be sure that we move the property into a private receivership so that a more responsible management entity can take care of it. So I'm happy to report to you with, I'm still skeptical. I'm still cautiously optimistic that even though we have a new management, we're still looking into to be sure that they don't have relationships with JPC and just another shell company that is trying to do something similar. So I felt that we worked hard and we worked smart and we invested every ounce of energy to deal with the issue in my district, in Senate District 30. Fast forward, the same entity, JPC, owned several properties in Indianapolis outside of my district. They went through the same exact process. And I think the conclusion of that, even they engaged the AG in that process, but they banned the out-of-state landlord for 7 years from operating in the state. And they have to sell to a private entity, and out of the proceeds of that sale, they have to credit the utilities and others and so on. But this is not the first time in the history of the city that we deal with these types of issues. There are several other problematic properties that are owned by out-of-state and out-of-country negligent landlords. And in some instances, it's not even negligence. Out-of-state investors from within the United States tend to look at our market, and it's much cheaper than the East Coast or the West Coast. So they grab these properties, they sleep on them, they let them sit idle for years. That's why we had blight after the 2008-2009 recession. If you remember, it was a very dominant topic on the news about blight in Indianapolis and in Marion County. But now with the low inventory of homes, we see all of these investors coming in the city trying to flip a home, make a quick buck, and then leave. Substandards, code violations, do not meet the standards, and then they leave the homeowner struggling. I am dealing currently with a case in my own district by which a young family bought a home. The out-of-state investor hired an out-of-state contractor, remodeled the home, had tens of violations that did not meet code. And then these young couple, they bought the home, they recognized there were some issues, but they didn't fully understand the magnitude of these issues. So they had to hire a local contractor to deal with these issues. Until today, it's been almost 12 months, they had a construction loan with a limited timeline, with a low interest rate because they did it last year. And now they are almost unable to meet the deadline to fix all of these issues. So the conversion of that construction loan to a long-term permanent mortgage is at risk, and they might go from 3% to 8% or 6% or 7% interest rate, which would immediately make it effective for them that they cannot afford that home and they have to lose all of their investments that they've put to renovate that place. So this is just a background on some of the issues that we're struggling with based on state law that tilts toward landlords. And we're not saying do not protect landlords. We need to protect responsible landlords. All what we're asking for is a balanced approach to protect the rights of both responsible landlords and responsible tenants. The number one reason for, one of the top reasons for evictions is lack of affordability. I think a recent study, I'm not sure if it was Prosperity Indiana or the Housing Coalition or the formerly known, I never remember the name, the Indiana Working Families Institute. Their new name is lengthy. I don't remember what the Poverty Action Network or something like that. They did a study that showed, remember, living wages are critical for families to be able to afford homes and rental units. Our minimum wage in Indiana is still sitting, I think, at $7.25. And the study has shown that to be able to afford a modest 2-bedroom apartment, you need to be at $16.23, if I recall correctly. At $7.25, you need to work over 90 hours a week, to be able to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Indiana. Now, I fully recognize that housing issues are different from one community to other communities. So, for example, in rural communities where 50 counties lost population, they might have a different type of housing issues than what we have in urban and suburban communities. But the affordability continues to be an issue. Legal clarity in terms of who is responsible for dealing with these issues under the law. So one of the motives of why I introduced Senate Bill 230 is that because in the case of Lakeside Point, we had over, I think, a few hundred, maybe 300 or 400 code violations by the 600 code violations by the Marion County Department of Public Health, and tens of violations by the BNS, the Business and Neighborhood Services Agency under the mayor, which is formerly known as the Code Enforcement Agency. But what we discovered is that because Marion County and the city of Indianapolis are consolidated as one government unit of government, there's a disconnect, and the law separated roles and responsibilities, which created an additional complexity. So under the model of a consolidated city in Indianapolis and Marion County, the Marion County Department of Public Health falls under a separate municipal corporation called HHC, Health and Hospital Corporation, and that corporation does not report to the mayor. The mayor has a couple of appointments on that board, the council has a couple of appointments on that board, but legally it's completely separate municipal corporation. Think about it as a separate government entity. Under the mayor's office, there's the department that we call BNS, Business and Neighborhood Services. BNS reports to the mayor's office, and by law, they are responsible for code violations outside of a structure, not inside a structure. The Department of Public Health can go inside a facility and issue health citations from within a structure or within a facility. So you have two entities with two separate responsibilities, both of them filing violations. Add to it the legal ambiguity about the role of the AG versus the Secretary of State. So the tenants were left lost between all of these legalities. So my Senate Bill 230 sought to do a couple of things. First is to ensure living conditions, habitable living conditions in apartment complexes and homes and rental units. But also it sought to clarify the role of these different legal entities. So my colleagues, the chairman of the committee that my bill went to, his name is Senator Jim Buck. His dad used to be a building commissioner. So he told me that he was very empathetic to the cause, but he really didn't think that, he understood what the issue is. What I discovered is that he did understand what the issue is, but he received a 20-page legal analysis from the Apartment Association telling him we oppose this legislation because they don't want government to interfere with those who own apartments across the state of Indiana. But he was willing to convert that topic into a summer study committee. So we changed my bill into a summer study committee and it passed the Senate unanimously. Fast forward, when we tried to get the topic to be studied, there were a couple of requests for a housing task force. I'm glad that we do currently have a housing task force, and I'm currently serve on a summer study committee. We call it the Housing Task Force. We had many community advocates and allies show up and testify, and we have, I think, one more meeting left to come up with some recommendations that we can publicize what we can do in Indiana. The last thing that I want to do on that committee is to come up with recommendations to help developers subsidize the cost to build $2 million plus mansions in Hamilton County or elsewhere. The goal of this task force, in my perspective, is to be able to deal with the crisis. And the crisis is that the American dream is getting farther away every single day from the reach of so many families, every single day. And we have to deal with this issue. So to conclude, I think there are two task forces that I serve on currently, the Housing Task Force, which I just mentioned, and then there's a second one called the Low Barrier Homeless Shelter Task Force. And I serve on that one. And the goal for that one, Indianapolis, even though we have one of the largest or the highest rates of evictions in the nation, we still deal with the homelessness problem in our city. We have so many neighbors who are unsheltered. There were cases over the last decade where we lost a couple of unsheltered neighbors who died because of freezing in the cold. So it's a crisis. So that the goal of that task force, that second task force, is to come up with a model by which government-sponsored, city-sponsored homeless shelter that in partnership with the nonprofit and the private sector that can be established in Indianapolis to deal with this issue. So those are just my thoughts. I wanted to share with you my motive that I deeply care about this issue, not only because I personally went through that after Hurricane Katrina, but I think there are so many families across the state, hundreds of thousands of families who are struggling. And the policy is very complicated, not complicated because we don't know what the solutions are. It's complicated because the current party in control has one policy preference. And I'll be very careful by saying this because it's always my approach. I never question people's motives or intentions. I don't call people names, but their policy preference does not align where it needs to be aligned to help hardworking, Hoosier families. And the only way in Indiana that we can restore balance, not only to housing policy, but to nursing homes, to educational policy, to infrastructure, to all of these issues, the only solution on earth, the only solution is to restore political balance in the General Assembly. There's no other solution. We have 39 Republican state senators and 11 Democrats in the Senate. And on the House side, we have 71 Republicans and 29 Democrats. Now, remember, and I always say Indiana is not a Republican state. Indiana is a gerrymandered state that gave the Republicans undue power. Huge difference. Democrats won in the state of Indiana statewide offices in the last decade. We held the governor's office and other places. If the Democrats were fully in charge today, with supermajorities, we would have similar problems. So don't get me wrong. If you have one party control, one party system, you would still have similar problems because we tend to become arrogant with no balances, no checks and balances. And we decide there's nothing to stop us. So that's why it's critical for us to be engaged as citizens, to show up at committees. I appreciate Rabbi Spiegel for his work and leadership with the coalition on the GMA and the Housing Coalition and Prosperity Indiana. They have been very vocal on this. I will I'm done with my comments on housing, but I will give you one more policy issue that is near and dear to my heart that has an intersection with the housing policy. It is unbelievable that we have the 5th most expensive nursing home system in the nation, and bottom 5, one of the worst 5 nursing home systems in the nation. The FBI investigated financial fraud and embezzlement and lack of care over the last few years, and few executives from the American senior communities were prosecuted and are currently spending time behind bars. Article after article showed that the nursing home industry is one of the top campaign donors to legislators. I'm happy to report to you that I received $0 from them, and I will not accept money from them. They are top donors, so you start questioning, why is reform too difficult in Indiana? And again, I'm not questioning anyone's motives or intentions. Not only we lost over 23,000 Hoosiers during COVID, but at least more than half of those were senior citizens at nursing homes. Now, don't get me wrong, we have amazing nursing homes across the state, high quality, people working hard, and we had frontline workers working every single day to take care of our seniors. But there were bad apples in that industry too, and they cannot govern themselves, they cannot police themselves. And they have a need for a different housing solution that is different than just an affordable unit or a home. When you talk about people with different abilities, physical or behavioral or mental abilities, they have a different need for housing solutions. The intersection of the housing policy with healthcare, with nursing homes, with education, with our school system, with our economy, it's all intertwined. And if we don't pay attention to it, then it will create issues for the rest of the state. So I appreciate you, and I probably overextended my time, but thank you for making this. Thank you to the JCC and my beloved siblings in the Jewish community for being very thoughtful leaders in this space, and for all of the advocates who have been working hard on this issue. And I look forward to working with all of you on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Qaddoura. And let's give him another hand. Senator Qaddoura is absolutely one of the strongest champions on the issue of the need for affordable and stable housing in Indiana. Again, I'm Andrew Bradley. I'm Policy Director with Prosperity Indiana. We're the statewide association for community economic development. I want to thank Rabbi Spiegel and the JCC for hosting this event. Before we started, I was talking with Rabbi Spiegel and saying that Prosperity Indiana has been involved in community economic development issues for 36 years in Indiana. And that involves a lot of work in affordable housing. And boy, do I wish that we didn't have to spend so much time talking about basic housing stability and evictions and why Indiana stands out so much from the rest of the state in that way. But we do, and we are, and that's why we're here. I am also here on behalf of the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition, but I'm not the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition myself. We're a statewide coalition. We have a steering committee that's made up of some of the strongest voices on affordable housing issues throughout the state, and including in Indianapolis. But we know that in order to make change in the state, we need to focus statewide. And so I also want to give special thanks to Bruce and Elizabeth and all the organizers of this event. Let's give them a quick hand as well. They've done so much good work on this series. And can I ask, I see some familiar faces. This is the third of these events that you've invited me to, so I haven't embarrassed you too much. Could you raise your hand if this is your first time at one of these events? Okay, there's a few. Thank you very much for coming out to this for the first time. Raise your hand if you've been to 2 or more of these. All right, thank you very much. There is a really good core of active individuals here in Indianapolis, and this coalition and group that Bruce and Elizabeth and fellows have brought together really demonstrate that this is a concern throughout the state. And so one reason why I wanted to come back here, was asked to come back, is to make sure that we leave you with some actionable steps that you can take. And that's something that I've been very impressed about this series, is that through the court watching that groups members of this group have been involved in, through some of the work that's been happening throughout this series, we're talking about action that you can take to make that statewide difference. So what I'm here to talk about is about the policy priorities that our statewide coalition has come up with. Before I jump into that, just very quickly, some of the same facts that Senator Qaddoura was mentioning. Indiana has this outsized housing affordability and stability crisis that is very different than most of our Midwest neighbors. And although it's a statewide problem, I know those are very small points on that map, but you can see that Indiana has affordability and eviction problems, not just in Indianapolis, but in urban, rural, and suburban parts of the state alike. And even though it's a statewide issue, we know that it disproportionately impacts certain communities and populations. Black and brown Hoosiers, low-income renter households, and families with children throughout the state have been disproportionately impacted by some of the policy choices that we already heard about. So taking all of that into account, we looked at what are the policy levers and the reasons why Indiana stands out from so many of our neighbors. And a few things really stuck out. Indiana is one of only 5 states nationwide that does not allow renters who face the type of black mold and horrible situations like Senator Qaddoura mentioned at Lakeside Point to be able to withhold their rent and put it into escrow with a bank, or to repair the issue themselves and deduct it from rent. One of only 5 states nationwide. And we wonder why there's so few affordable and available housing units throughout the state. On the piece of paper in front of you, it mentions that in Marion County, only 20 out of every 100 extremely low-income households has an affordable and available place to live. And so the other people, they're not all homeless, but they may be couch surfing, or they may be forced to make do with that type of poor habitability situations because there's no enforcement of what's on the rule on the books. So Senator Qaddoura's Senate Bill 230 last year is one of those had solutions proposed for that. There are other issues, though, that we need to take into consideration. That big preemption bill from a few years ago struck down the city of Indianapolis's efforts to be able to provide a tenant's bill of rights. So we've taken away local solutions. And meanwhile, we have this gap of over 135,000 units that we need especially for those extremely low income households throughout the state. So taking all that together, our Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition has put together a set of priorities that we think meets this moment. It doesn't necessarily solve every problem that is out there, but we think that we can catch on to some of the momentum that the people in this room have helped put together, and also that is demonstrated by the Indiana Housing Task Force. There really is a moment. I've heard it from a few other legislators saying, we've heard this is going to be the housing session next year. And boy, if there's going to be a housing session, then we need to make the most of that to make a dent in that 135,000 gap. So if you saw at the back of the room, we have put those new priorities into this shiny new document. And I'll tell you what, the people in this room, you are our guinea pigs. You are the very first people that we're talking to about. We haven't even published this online yet. We will later this week. So bear with me. You're the first to hear about this. So we've tried to categorize the type of policy solutions that are needed throughout the state. Given that there is this housing task force, they're working especially on what does it take to produce new units. And yes, we agree that increasing the supply of affordable housing is really the underlying issue underneath all of this, that we need a larger supply. But we also need to make sure that the units that we have are habitable, that people can actually live in them, that they're not living in horrible mold and infestation and rat problems and raw wiring and all that. And then we also need to make sure that those units are more affordable and accessible for all Hoosiers, especially those communities that are hardest hit. So I will let you read those individual items. I don't want to go through each and every one of them, but I want to tell you just a little bit about why we think these are the most important issues. So based on some of the conversations our coalition has had with Senator Qaddoura, some of the issues that we know he's bringing forward, some of the conversations that housing task force has come up with, we're going to propose that the state create a housing stability pilot fund that would serve as that bridge to a more permanent emergency rental assistance program that would help create a flexible fund to address some of the homelessness issues that we see throughout the state. We're building this on an example from Virginia. For example, the Virginia Eviction Reduction Pilot Program is one example that we're building this on. We want Indiana to catch up with those 45 other states that allow renters to put rent into escrow. And then we also think that there are better connections that are possible with court-based eviction diversion programs. So that's that habitability side of things. We also recognize that we do need to build those new units to be able to fill that 135,000 unit gap throughout the state. And to do that, we need to make sure that we keep in mind where those gaps are the most. Unfortunately, when talking with some of the legislators that are out there that haven't heard from people like you as much, they're thinking about, we need, price ranging like around the $200,000 homes. And I don't know about you, but I could not afford a $200,000 home myself right now. And much less many of those people who are currently dealing with those horrible conditions. They're not going to jump into and be able to afford those units. So we need to make sure that the new housing that we're building is reflective of the proportionality of needs throughout the state. Also need to make sure that the type of nonprofit groups throughout the state are part of that process, helping to inform and point out to where there are issues. Actually, there's some good examples from our surrounding communities. Hamilton County, Fishers, even did a housing study that helped pinpoint some needs for senior Hoosiers, low-income Hoosiers, Black and brown Hoosiers, those with special accessibility needs, and you need to lift those up and listen to those. And making sure that we're empowering those communities. Then the third leg is to make sure that the units that we're building and that we have for Hoosiers are more accessible and affordable. One of Senator Qaddoura's ideas is to increase the Indiana renters. It was currently the Indiana renters deduction. So you deduct it from your state taxes. We would love for Indiana to not only increase the dollar amount to bring that up to modern times, but also to make that a refundable tax credit. So some of those lower income and more vulnerable populations would be able to take advantage of it. We also want to clear the pathway of home ownership. And we think that there are some of the issues that we talked about with unaccountable out-of-state and corporate investors. There are some of those levers that we really need to address. And one thing that we keep hearing time and time again is that there are too many silos throughout the state, with state government, with local government, and with individual pots of money. We're moving program by program. We are proposing that the governor appoint an Indiana Commission on Housing and Homelessness to pick up where this next housing task force leaves off, and to be able to address this moving forward. This is not going to be an issue that goes away, even with the most successful next state session of the Indiana General Assembly. There needs to be sustained momentum. So that's a lot. Even if all of this was done, if we got all these things ticked off, that would take a whole lot. And in order for that to happen, we need a lot more than just who's in this room here. So to talk next, actually, before I ask Bruce to introduce my colleague Hale, this is on the brochure that you have in front of you. This is a way that you can get updates when we put this out on our website and have a press release later this week. We're also going to include some specific action steps that you can take. And so please make sure that you're signed up. So if you have a sec, take out your phone, make sure that you have signed up for these updates while you're here in the room. And so to talk about some of those next actionable steps you can take to leverage your contacts, Bruce, let me bring it to you. Thank you.
thank you to both Fady and to Andrew for kind of just laying out some policy. We want to move into what do we do other than hope that things go better this legislative session. And there are a couple of next steps we're working on. Hale Crumley is the coalition coordinator for Prosperity Indiana, and she has been working with various groups to start some things that you actually can get involved. And so I'm going to get out of the way and let Hale kind of explain that to you. Opportunities for people to actually do something, which is when you're thinking housing, what do we do? Well, we're going to try to answer that. I will say this as well. After Hale speaks, we're going to allow Senator Qaddoura and Andrew to have a Q&A with some of you for a few minutes. If there are some things that you'd like some clarity on, some understanding of what policy could look like in the next few months as we head into the next session. So we'll be getting to that. But first, Hale's going to kind of explain some actual practical things you can be involved in.
All right, thank you. Oh, goodness. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is something that was already covered at a different meeting. It is called the Court Watchers Toolkit. I just want to do a quick preview of this because we've already spent a lot of time before talking about it. Some of these are at your table. If you don't have any, there's going to be more at the far back table. So the Court Watchers Toolkit was put together by the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition. Our steering committee is made up of a lot of different experts. We have law experts, fair housing experts, all sorts of people coming together to put this great material together. It is only 5 pages, and I'm really, really proud of that because it's hard to make something comprehensive in 5 pages. So this 5-page toolkit explains how you can go to your local evictions court and see the evictions crisis firsthand. Housing instability is a really private thing that is hard for you to witness if you don't personally know someone going through it. And if you do see it, it's probably because you see someone in the street and your first urge is to look away. But you can still see this happening in your community, and you can actually see the start of it when you're able to help. So what you can do is you can go to your local court, and this explains how you find out where that is, what you need to know beforehand. And it is a completely free, open place that you're allowed to go and step in, even if you don't know the person who's going through it. You can go and watch and see how they're treated by the judge, see whether or not they have representation, if they were able to get that, see what they look like and what their story is. And I really encourage everyone to try this because, like I said, if you're not personally going through housing instability, it's hard to understand what it's like and it's hard to feel personal, but this is happening in your own city and you can go see it. And it actually helps to go see it. We've been receiving word that there's actually evidence that tenants are being treated better because a court watcher is in the room and they don't know who you are. They don't know what you know, but they know someone is watching them and they're seeing how these judges are treating the tenants. So you have a real impact. You get to witness what's going on in your city. And I promise it is so easy. You do not need a law degree. So if you have any more questions about this, I won't linger any longer, but at the back table at the way back of the room is the United Methodist Church. They were amazing partners in creating this toolkit. They started this effort and now we're trying to spread it around the state. So if you have any questions, please go back and talk to them. You may be able to join their group if it's local. And I really encourage you to try court watching. It's a great way to get involved very directly and see what's going on out there. One more thing I want to cover, network mapping. So you should have a paper like this. It should be underneath one of the other papers in front of you if you can pull that out. Network mapping is really important when you want to get into advocacy. And it sounds really scary, but it's actually not. The whole idea is you know people. It's really that simple. You know people who can do something just as much as you can, and sometimes maybe even more. So this network mapping is something we're all going to go through in a minute, but I want to give you a couple personal examples. So the idea is just to connect people who are near you, who may be able to do something about this issue, or who may just be interested in it. It doesn't have to be somebody super powerful. So it just says me in the middle. So let's pretend that's me, Hale. One bubble out from that. The person I can think of right now is my really good friend, Alex, in Northern Indiana. Most of my examples are going to be there. That's where I'm from. My good friend, Alex, was actually homeless when we were teenagers. She was kicked out by her parents and she was couch surfing for a while and lived in her car and in my friends' homes for a while. So Alex knows what it's like to deal with housing issues, and she's very passionate. Alex also loves politics. She recently, for a recent election, went door to door, trying to get someone elected that she really cared about. So I know she's not afraid to engage in these issues, and she knows what homelessness is like. She might want to sign up for these emails and find out what more she can do. Why not, right? I can at least ask her. She's a good friend. It would be one text I could send. It's not hard. And then, like I said, there's another bubble actually connects from there. So here's Alex, and one bubble away from Alex would be where Alex works. Alex actually works at a community center in South Bend. And this is not just any community center. They actually don't engage in housing at all, but they are the community center for the University of Notre Dame. And so this very small team at this community center meets with higher ups at Notre Dame University once a month, very easily. And it's a small team, like I said, so they do have some input. If they decided that they wanted to get into housing because of what they were hearing from a group like this, that would be an amazing pipeline to people with lots of connections and lots of power who may be able to help. That's really important. So you may have connections like this that you are not thinking of, and it just takes a little bit of brainstorming. Some of them are not quite that crazy. I know that one is a little bit lucky. I will also say my own mother. She works at St. Mary's University, which is an arm of Notre Dame University, and she's in the administration building. If I just asked her to print out a couple of these and put them on the tables for the students to see as they were sitting down and studying and eating, I know she would. And there are thousands of students there who are, young, and they have a lot of energy, and they might start feeling really passionately about this. It's a very good school. That's something that I could do. So I just want everyone to take a moment and try and think about your network. You've got pens on your table. We're going to give it about 5 minutes, and some people who helped organize this event can walk around and help and think about things, but you do have more connections than you think. And I really want you to try and identify them. You know people who can help spread the word. One more thing I want to add before you all start walking around and working on this is on the backside. Here are some talking points. So you said, great, I got a hold of somebody. I realized that there's someone I know who might care about this. What do I talk to them about? Well, I've offered you 3 things here, and each one has their own digital connection. So one, you can just tell them to do the refer a friend option and say, I think you're interested in this. I'd like to refer you as my friend to get emails, and then they can opt in or out if they want to. That easy. That's one thing that you can do as a talking point, is say, hey, I thought you'd be interested in this. I referred you. You might get an email. Another thing, you can just encourage them to try out the Court Watchers Toolkit. I've got the link for that too. You can explain to them that you learned about it here, what it does, how easy it is, and send it to them. They can try it out. And then also, they can just get connected on social media. Sometimes you're not ready to take a big step, but just seeing something on your Facebook page every once in a while to remind you that this is an issue and that there are options to receive action alerts and what you can do is always a great step too. So I want to give you 5 minutes starting now. Everybody, please grab a pen and try and think about your own networks. Thank you.
If everybody can go ahead and make your way back to your seats, and we're going to open the floor for a few minutes for Senator Qaddoura and Andrew. In the interest of time, I will not act as the moderator as such. We're just going to let Fady and Andrew be here. And if you have questions, we have a microphone here so that the people on Zoom can also hear. So if you would be willing to just come to the microphone, we will open the floor for Andrew and Fady, and they'll decide between them which of them wants to field and answer the questions that you have for them. And we're just going to let them kind of talk for a few minutes. We started about 15 minutes late. We've pretty much caught up. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Hale did an amazing job of tying everything together really quickly. So for the next few minutes, I'm just going to hand it over to Andrew and Fady and let you guys take. If anybody has questions, there's the microphone right there, and we'll just go from there.
Yeah. Who's gonna break the ice?
You need to answer into the microphone so your Zoom callers can hear you.
So you brought up earlier that I guess my question is, where are we hearing this idea of a kind of a housing session? And, you know, it is dependent in some ways on Republicans being down for passing some of this legislation. What are you hearing, and how open are they at this point to some of the proposals that you've put forward?
Can I ask, could you, people identify your name and if you're with an organization?
I am Ben Thorpe, and I'm with WFYI.
I would say, from my perspective, I've heard that this is an upcoming housing session from a couple of legislators. Is in a private conversation, so I don't want to name them right now. But I would say the fact that there's this ongoing Indiana Housing Task Force, and Senator Qaddoura is one of the 4 legislators that are part of that. I think there's a concerted effort to try to have legislation coming out of that. So from my perspective, it seems like those are a few indicators that there will be some housing bills of some sort. And from our Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition perspective, we want to make sure that whatever that legislation is focuses on the needs of some of the most underrepresented and impacted populations. Senator Qaddoura, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
As long as there's a crisis in the state and people rise up to bring their voices and concerns to the political process, you will see that every session, this is going to become a more important topic for several reasons. One, from a workforce development, there are communities that are attracting employers and they can't find housing units for them. So it became a workforce related issue. So that's one. Second, from an economic perspective, the demand on homes and rental units caused an unintended consequence that deals with property taxes. So because of COVID and lack of supply chain issues, you notice that property taxes went up. And when property taxes go up, when gas prices go up, and the public make it very clear that they want their state government to do something about it, then they start getting engaged into finding solutions. I'm again cautiously optimistic that there's a sincere effort on that committee to come up with solutions. But I will tell you that I'm not too confident that the proposed solutions will be comprehensive enough to deal with the crisis. I think there are other invested stakeholders that have different interests. They're not bad interests, but they do have interests, such as the developers. They want to build more, correct? Which is a great thing because we need to partner with developers. So when you talk about affordability has a healthy tension with profitability. So you want to build more homes, but you want it to be affordable. And if the market fails to provide affordable homes, then government has to engage to subsidize that. And most of the discussions on that committee have been focused on what role the state government can play in subsidizing those projects. And it seems that everyone is moving towards ideas such as creating residential TIFs, tax increment finance solutions, which allow developers to subsidize the cost of the underground utilities and municipal sewer, connected to municipal sewer systems and so on. So while I will be very supportive of these ideas, we have to have many tools. I'm not confident that we'll have enough tools coming out of that report. A final thought, the report is just a report. The recommendations in that report do not translate necessarily into law that will pass. It's going to be incumbent upon us on the committee to actually include that language into a legislative bill. And I do intend to, I'm waiting to see what the outcomes are going to be and shape those outcomes of that task force. And wherever gaps that exist in that, I'm going to introduce a housing bill to deal with the renters deduction, out of state, negligent, irresponsible investors and landlords. I will also be dealing with the living conditions piece. And finally, a final point, I successfully passed a piece of legislation last year, my Senate Bill 236. It passed the Senate unanimously, but then it got amended into an agency bill. My Senate Bill 236 specifically dealt with a different type of problem. Senior citizens on fixed income over the age of 65, under state law today, you qualify for a $14,400 credit towards your assessed value if you file your taxes as a single person over the age of 65 and you only make $30,000 a year, or if you file jointly and you make 40,000. So the three conditions: if you're single making 30 over the age of 65, if you're a couple filing jointly and make 40,000 or less, and your home is assessed at $200,000 or less, you qualify for $14,400 credit towards your assessed value. So instead of paying taxes on 200,000, you pay taxes on, roughly speaking, 185,000. So with COVID, home prices went up, and some senior citizens were getting kicked off that credit. So I introduced a piece of legislation, Senate Bill 236, to increase the assessed value to 400,000 and to change the income thresholds from 30 to 40 and from 40 to 50. I had to convince 149 other people of my idea, and you know how difficult that is. At the end of the process, they refused to change the income thresholds, but they accepted to change the assessed value piece. and they changed it from 200,000 to 240,000, much less than what I, bless you, much less than what I asked for, but it was a step in the right direction. So I'll continue to work on these issues.
Thank you. And while Erica is doing that, the one last thing I'd say about that housing task force is that the Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition was given a spot on it. Another steering committee member, Dee Ross, you might have met him before, represents our coalition. But we were able to kind of get that spot because we convinced the chair that there was not a spot for consumers. Every other spot was either a legislator or a producer. And as Senator Qaddoura said, if that's a lot of the conversation, that if the legislators are getting, the ear from the producers, consumers and the rest of regular Hoosiers need to make sure that there's a proportional balance. That's why we're doing this network mapping. We need to have regular Hoosiers and your contacts who are in the districts of those key legislators who make the decisions, make sure that they hear about who truly needs housing in Indiana so that there's a balanced approach. So unless we have your contacts that come back to us, we can't engage those people and have them work with those legislators. That's why we're doing that exercise here.
Hi, my name is Marilyn Kuhn. I'm a member at Second Pres in a social justice group. And my question is, do we have any communities or developers that are doing the right things, that have some good housing available and affordable, and that are working with us that we could get on board to help us to say that this really can be done, it can be profitable, it can be healthy? It seems like maybe if there were in the state, I'm sure we're learning from out of state, but I just thought maybe there's somebody in the state.
You know what? I'm going to bring up Marshall. We have one here in the room, and I want to recognize Marshall came and to be part of this conversation. And, I don't know if you want to come up and talk briefly about some of the things that, exactly what you told me are some of the right things, and we just need more of it.
Thank you. I want to thank you. My name is Marshall Berry. I'm with Radiant CDC and Teenage Investments. We are an affordable housing developer. And I was thanking the senator and sharing with him that we do have some wonderful things that are happening in the state of Indiana. We have some amazing affordable housing developers, specifically working with what we call the low-income housing tax credit program. And one of the things Senator probably knows that this is one of the best bipartisan, both public and private program. And it's through the Lieutenant Governor's office. And so it's a wonderful program where we're bringing not 10 houses on site, but we're bringing 200 affordable housing units all across Indiana. One that I have currently going on and my company has and that I work for is down at the Central State, Indiana. There's 4 acres down there, if you're familiar with what's happening down there. And we're bringing on 200 units that are at that 60% AMI. So this is more of your entry level working. In addition, we have 4,000 square feet of community space that we're bringing in. So we are making a dent. It's not always talked about, but there is programs that out there. So, but we need more. We need more opportunity. One of the hardest things we deal with is municipalities with architectural standards, going in and trying to do affordable housing, and the requirements of what the architectural features are is very, very difficult. We face it all the time. But we also have a lot of municipalities. One, I can say Plainfield is very supportive of what we're doing. They've been very supportive of affordable housing. So you have some phenomenal towns and cities throughout Indiana, including Indianapolis, that's supportive of what we're doing. So there is good things happening. You may not always hear about it. I'm doing a permanent supportive housing right now for 130 townhomes. That is permanent supportive housing for those that are going through mental crisis and the homeless. So be watching for that. You'll hear more about it. Amazing affordable housing developers all throughout Indiana. So yes, there are good things happening. Sometimes we don't hear about it, but they are making a difference. Thank you.
She's on Patchwork's board. And again, that's what we need is for, we want to make sure that this is not a landlord versus tenant or developer versus community conversation. As much as we can get people who are on the same board and who understand that there's to fill that 135,000 unit gap, we need everybody working together.
Hi, my name is Dorothy Ellen, and I actually was I was a homeowner, and then I sold my house in 2019 and moved out of state and got to travel and came back here specifically to help my daughter with her raise her baby. And ended up getting a place of my own. And it was the most deplorable circumstance I ever lived in my life. And right now, the thing is there's a lot of things going on underneath the radar and also very convoluted. With all due respect, this is really nice talk. However, there's an injustice, and I'm a person of high justice. I'm an advocacy a lot for the people who have disabilities, et cetera, and trying to explain and articulate. There's organizations that come in, like places like Indiana, and they're swooping in and they're buying up real estate and they're renting these places out and they're not taking care of them. And right now there's a big class action suit brewing with Reverie Estates. Look it up, please, Reverie Estates. And the health department just took them to a pre-trial court, and they're supposed to, such deplorable living conditions, and they're getting away with it. And there's people there that have disabilities and can't speak for themselves. I'm the voice of a lot of people. And it's what I've learned is, as I've done my cross-referencing and dug deep. For example, the law, there were laws that were passed over the past few years, and I don't know when, because I quit getting involved with politics a couple of years ago. There was some type of law that possibly was passed. The problem being, with all due respect, and this is just what I've heard, so it's secondhand knowledge, but it's probably true, that the lawmakers themselves are actually corporate owners of, or private owners of rental units. So they don't want to defeat their own purpose of making money. And frankly, there's a lot of greed going on, and a lot of, it's terrible the way we treat each other as human beings. And then also my question is, though, pertaining to that, I don't know how long you've been are you a senator, sir? Okay. If you are familiar with that, and if you can expound on that. And we've got to stop being so greedy as human beings. The other issue is the illegals that are coming across the border, unfortunately, are taking the place right now of people who are desperate for homes, a place to live. And I encourage you, as well as going to the court systems, go onto the streets or go into the homeless places and talk to some folks that have been homeless. There's a lot of people there that are veterans. There's a lot of people there that are just really good, solid people, but they don't have, they lost their compass in life. And believe me, it's painful to see it. And then I was just coming here and I saw a woman with a little boy getting on electrical fence down there at Meridian Street and getting off of 465 with her husband, begging money. I gave her a thing of water, and then I noticed she had a whole bunch of water, and I figured I got taken on that one. Now, there's so much going on, but we need to, I'd like to really know if anybody wants to raise their hand who has ever been homeless or knows somebody that's homeless or has ever been involved with anybody that's homeless.
I think, thank you, Dorothy. If I may respond.
Okay, I got one more thing to say.
Sure.
Again, there's just so much going on. The people with disabilities and the seniors you mentioned about too. We can't just talk a talk. We got to walk the walk. And the people who've got the upper echelon of finances, it's not enough just to make a statement. You have to get involved. You have to go out there and feel the pain that these folks are feeling. I encourage every one of you here, if you get a chance, go buy a cup of coffee at the Central State Mansion. And there's a nice little coffee place, but there's $200,000 homes being built right across the street. And you can go and talk to the homeowner, the person who's a real estate person. She's so concerned about the blightedness of that property that she's concerned about the financial aspect of the home buying business. So it all connects together. And I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you for your commentary. I'm not sure if maybe you missed the part when I spoke earlier. So no, it's okay. So I was homeless before. I've been in office for 2 years only. Got elected in 2020, and we talked about the root causes of the problems. I agree with you on some points that you shared as far as I mentioned specifically the legislation that I introduced, and I mentioned the commentary from my Republican colleagues who are landlords or they own units, and I explained why Indiana's law tilts more towards landlords. I'll be more than happy to brief you so that I don't repeat the same thing to the audience one more time. But I think the point about advocacy in terms of statements versus action, I think you bring a good point. Today, we are discussing policy ideas, but I don't want anyone to leave with the understanding that we're just talking. There are different ways of change, and law is one of those things, because if you look at the root causes of how we can improve things, sometimes you can come up with a law that can fix 80% of a problem. So it's critical for us to pay attention to the law. The nature of the legislative process, we only meet once a year in Indiana between January to end of March. So today we might be discussing policy ideas, but we follow through by introducing bills and legislation. And we ask you, would love for you to show up at the State House, make your voice heard, speak to the legislators, those who you cited, or referenced today, tell them, why are you opposed to this? So on the issue of immigrants, whether legal or illegal, I appreciate that you mentioned you're a human rights or a justice advocate on behalf of folks who support disabilities. Whether someone's is documented or undocumented, I firmly believe in human rights. And I firmly believe that every human, regardless where they come from, regardless where they are, they deserve to be dignified when it comes to healthcare, to housing, to education. On the committee that I serve on, we received data about the problems we face in Indiana. I cited the history of these problems. So these problems were caused by so many issues since 2008. Indiana did not keep up with building new homes and affordable units. We did not introduce laws to protect our tenants from negligent landlords from within the state or outside of the state. So I'll be more than happy, just to be respectful of everyone's time, after the Q&A session is done. I'll be more than, yeah. Thank you for that. But sure. Sure. We at the state level, we don't deal with immigration law. That's a federal thing. At the state level, that's not something that we deal with. What we deal with, and I would encourage you to engage with your local city councilor, because cities and municipalities, when they engage in economic development, they can work on economic incentives to increase the number of housing units that are affordable and so on. So I encourage you to work with that. Any other questions? There's one more in the back. Like this.
Thank you. I'm Dick D. Alton with Meridian Street United Methodist. We're the guys sitting back here with the court watching information. But this is more of a statement than it is a question. Court watching has been very good for any of us that have gone there. The biggest reason is we get to go there and we make a difference on the very simplest level of being seen, and having the judges and the people that are in the courtrooms know that we're there caring about the people that are being evicted. And that's a positive thing. The other positive thing that Andrew and Prosperity put us all onto in our group, and I think everybody can do this, is to go to the State House when the legislature is in session. You are allowed to sit in on these committee meetings. If you have a comment, you're allowed to sign up and stand up in front of a committee and tell them what's on your mind. It's a big deal. I know that Andrew's going to do that again. Prosperity will have another State House Day probably in January, but it doesn't mean you can't go down on your own and listen to what's going on, find out who the people are that are in charge. And everybody wants to do something in here. Those are two things you can do right now.
Thanks so much, Dick. And what I would leave people again with is the whole reason that we're here and that we're, again, asking for this information is so that we can help continue working with you and the people that you refer so that we can give you those more direct, actionable steps that you can take. This doesn't end today. We are in this process of getting ready for that next session. And we're going to be picking up where we left off with how to prepare you to talk with your legislators, and also how we can make sure that the right legislators hear from the people in their districts. Again, the committee chairs, the members of those committees that will hear or have the option to hear these key pieces of legislation that we're proposing. That's the work ahead of us. So again, if I could give you, one exhortation, it's please make sure that we can continue to be in contact with you moving forward.
Go ahead. Thank you. Just want to echo what Andrew mentioned. If you visit iga.in.gov, iga.in.gov, that's the website for the Indiana General Assembly. And when session begins, you are able to see the legislation that was introduced. You can search by legislator, and you can download the calendar for these committees so that you can show up. I promise you, as a legislator, when these committees meet and citizens show up to speak up, and you share your stories and you share your, the things that you know or that you care about as it relates to that specific topic, it makes a huge difference. And there are many legislators who change their mind in committee of how they're going to vote on a piece of legislation based on the stories that they hear. It doesn't take much to visit that website as far as effort. I fully understand it might be inconvenient to take time off and from your busy daily schedules to drive downtown and park and go to a committee and wait in line. But I think that's the effort in a democracy that we have to invest to be able to make that difference. So I appreciate you again for giving me the opportunity. It is my honor to serve you post November 8th. So the day after election, the morning after election, my district boundaries will change. It will not impact you. But basically, they took the Hamilton County portion out of my district, so I will be fully contained in Marion County. My new district is going to be between Kessler Boulevard all the way to 96th Street, and then on the west side all the way to Michigan Road. On the east side, it goes to North Lawrence High School or Lawrence North High School. So it's a nice rectangle from North Lawrence High School all the way to Pike Township High School, and then Kessler to 96. It's been an honor. Thank you for your voices. Thank you for everything you do, and I look forward to serving you. Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here, for taking time out of your afternoon to spend with us and talk about these things. Before we wrap up, I just want to make a couple of final comments. One thing is, as Andrew said, this is not ending here. We scheduled 4 of these looking toward January and the legislative session, but this is the beginning. Grassroots takes time. It takes effort. It takes building. I just want to say thank you to JCC for letting us use the facility, to Aaron for all his work in helping us get that put together. I quickly want to mention some people, some groups. This was put together by Patchwork and the Nora Neighborhood Ambassadors, along with St. Luke's, Second Pres, the Indiana Muslim Advocacy Network, Faith Church, Meridian Street Methodist Church. I think I'm covering almost everybody. That's all the main people. I think, Family Promise. And we have just continued to work on this. We will continue to work on this as we see what begins to develop. We have email addresses. We will be letting you know as things develop. One thing that I know will be happening either the end of January or 1st of February, right? Hoosier Housing Needs Coalition does a day at the State House, but also D. Ross and his Indiana Tenants Union does a tenants day at the State House, raising awareness significantly. He couldn't be here. He's at a wedding in Mexico. He asked me to mention that for everybody, that will be going on. The last thing, and I don't think she's in the room. I don't know where she's gone. She may be out in the lobby. All of this only happens because Elizabeth Essink is a logistics wizard. And I get to stand up here and do all the talking and look good. And she's the one who actually plans everything and makes sure that it all happens the way it's supposed to, and that Zoom links are connected and that everything is connected and that it all happens. So thank you very much to her. She's, I'm sure, out running around doing something somewhere, but Fady and Andrew are still around. Hale's here if you have questions. Thank you very much for being here. We will continue to work at this, folks. There was just an article in the Indy Recorder on Friday of another apartment complex on the east side of town facing similar situations. We're going to keep working with people trying to make a difference. It starts at our level and becomes significant as we all join together. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. Have a great afternoon. Yeah, recycle your box. Yeah.